Thank you everyone for joining today. My name is Nelson Wong. I am a Tableau trainer, analyst consultant at Alteryx, and I'm just really excited to show everyone sort of the new tool that Tableau has recently came out with around middle of the year, which is Tableau Prep. But before I go into it, just want to give a quick introduction of what I do. I've been with Alteryx for about a year, close to a year now. But I've been using Tableau Desktop for about 2 years. Before Alteryx, I was working at Booz Allen Hamilton and fell in love with Tableau and just wanted to get in more in depth with it. And that's how I ended at Alteryx. Been using Tableau Prep since it came out. It's been really powerful and it's helped me with some of my client engagements. So just a little bit about Alteryx before we actually jump into Tableau Prep. We are a small boutique data consulting firm based out of Stillwater, Oklahoma. It started as a little shop in our CEO's dorm room, which has now grown to almost every major metropolitan city in the US. So we have DC, New York, cities in California, Atlanta, Chicago, you name it. And it's also grown internationally through in areas like Singapore, Australia, and Europe. And as Tableau's demands have been growing, we've just been expanding as well. And the things that we help our clients with are pretty much all things data, starting with the BI side. So that's everything related to Tableau, from dashboard development, developing center of excellences, and trainings to help get our clients up to speed on maximizing Tableau productivity and getting their BI group up to speed on what they can, do within Tableau. But before we can actually start using data in Tableau, we spend probably a majority of our time prepping that data and cleaning it up so that we can actually work with it within desktop. And that's what Tableau Prep is going to be focusing on. That's this whole data management space. We also use tools like Alteryx and Dataiku. So if you have any questions on those, you can feel free to reach out to me on that. And then before we can even bring it into that data preparation stage, do we have the right infrastructure to support that? We have consultants who specialize in IT infrastructure to scale as our clients' BI needs grow. So if you have any questions on these, feel free to shoot them over in the chat, or we can touch base after this meetup. So whenever we have to work with data, usually the best way to approach, especially if it's, such a wide range of data that we could be working with, it usually starts with a question or a task. And once we have that task or that question, where can we go and grab that data from? And once we have, maybe it's from some servers or perhaps from some flat files, we need to bring all of that data together and find some sort of way that we can best represent it in Tableau Desktop or whatever BI tool you may be using. And there's a lot of cleaning, preparation, aggregations that go on, and finding that right structure to display it in Desktop. And that fine structure step is where Tableau Prep is going to fall into this whole analytics cycle. And while the arrow is pointing in one direction, this is by no means a sort of one-directional cycle. It can always go in the opposite direction as we find better processes. But some of our clients experience a bottleneck at this fine structure because they're spending so much time trying to clean the data. But if we can empower more of our users to be able to do those steps, we can then expand that bottleneck and hopefully make this cycle run a lot quicker. So like Desktop, Tableau Prep is meant to really give us the power to do those cleaning steps without having to know any of that hard SQL, or if some of us don't even come from any coding background. And for those of you that have used Tableau Desktop, it actually, learning Tableau Prep is quite easy, as some of the functionalities are quite similar, which we'll get into a little bit in just a bit. And currently, Tableau Prep is free with anyone with a Tableau Desktop license. And this will go on until around mid-2020, when they'll start charging. Currently, I don't know the pricing model on that, but be more than happy to direct those questions to an account executive if you have things of that nature. Now, what do you need to know in order to use Tableau Prep? While it's not required that users are experienced in Tableau Desktop, having that knowledge background or that experience does help with Tableau Prep, just because there are similar calculations we can create if anyone has done calculated fields. Some of the connections are similar, and some of the things that we can include in the workflow are very similar to desktop, like joins, doing pivots, and a couple other functionalities. We won't be able to go into every single piece, just given our time, but we will be focusing mainly on the cleaning aspects. Now, since Tableau Prep is fairly new, not all the data connectors that you would find in desktop are going to be available in Prep. However, Tableau is currently working on that, and right now we're just limited to a smaller group of connectors, which I'll show you in just a bit. Now, with Prep, there are multiple ways that we can get from point A to point Z, but what we have to consider when we're using Prep is which is going to be the best performance, which is going to be the best for automation, and how can we just simplify things to reduce the number of calculations and ultimately end up with a better performing workflow, which will be better in our workbook down the line. And we're just really scratching the surface with the capabilities. Tableau is investing a lot of resources into this product, so we do expect that Tableau Prep will come out with a lot more functionality for that data prep process. And with that, I'm going to now jump into Tableau Prep. So when you open Tableau Prep, this is going to be your starting screen. On the left-hand side, that blue section here on the left is going to be our connection pane. And if I click on this plus sign, this will give you a list of all the types of connections you can do. So currently in Prep, we only can connect to 3 flat files, which is going to be your Excel, your extract, or text files or CSVs, as well as a list of several different servers. Now, if there is a flat file or you have a server that is currently not on this list, if you have Tableau Desktop, what you can do is connect to that flat file or server through Tableau Desktop, create an extract out of that, and then connect that extract through this connection pane. So that's a little bit of a workaround as of now, but hopefully it'll be a temporary solution. In the middle, we have some recent workflows that you might have been working on, so just easy, quick access to those, especially if you have workflows that are leading to reports that you're creating on a periodic basis. It makes it really easy for you to click in, run the workflow, and update your data set to feed into desktop. And for those that are used to or have worked in desktop, we have that Discover section, just some additional resources for you to learn more about Prep, access to the forums, and things about Tableau Conference. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to connect to a Excel file, but I actually want to show you this Excel file before we bring it into Prep so that you can get a sense of how this is going to be transformed. Here I have just a small data set of just marital statuses for the Navy, and we have different pay grades, and each of the statuses is broken up into male, female, and as well as there's a total option. So I'm going to bring this table into Prep, and you're going to see how we're going to be able to transform this and make it useful for discoveries in desktop. So going back into Prep, I'm going to click on this plus sign, or I can click on Connect to Data, which basically does the same step of that plus, and I'm going to connect to Microsoft Excel. Let me go to Documents, see Tableau Prep, Data, Demo, and the active duty marital status for the Navy. So because of how that table was structured in Prep, in Excel, Tableau Prep can't recognize the fields because if we go back to that table, it's formatted in such a way where the first couple of rows are just blanks, and then it doesn't actually start populating with data until around row 8, where we get the field names. So like in desktop, Prep has that data interpreter that we can use. And that's going to help Prep recognize which fields or what are the names for those fields. So we see we have that pay grade, the single without children for male, single without children for female, and so on and so forth, as well as those total options. Now, a little bit on the breakdown of this interface. Up at the top here, where we have the navy, is going to be the flow pane. And this is where we can add any of the steps that we to prep our data. So we can add a step for cleaning, aggregation, pivots, joins, unions, and finally an output where it's going to run this workflow and create a CSV, a hyper, or a TDE file. And we'll show an output at the end of this demo. Below that, we have our input step, which is this gray section here. It's going to be this section. This is our input. We can connect to a single table, or we can do a wildcard union. And this is a similar function that we see in desktop, where it can point to some folder, and you can enter some sort of pattern that Prep can then use to union or add rows to just a single table, essentially making it longer. We can also take a data sample. I'm going to return this actually to a single table because we're not going to be doing a union. We can also take a data sample. It could be a fixed number of rows, so take the first X number, or it could just be a random sample. We won't be going into detail with this, but if you guys do have questions on this, I'll be more than happy to answer those at the end of the session. Now, to the right of that, we have our metadata profile, and that's this section here in the red. Just gives us a really high-level overview of our data. We have the data type, and you can actually change the data type by clicking on the icon. So I can change it to an integer, date and time, date, or a string. I have the field name as well as the original field name. Now, the original field name is reading from the Excel sheet, while the field name is the alias that I can change so that it represents differently in Prep and then desktop. So if I wanted to, I could double click on pay grade and simply just type in a different field that I would want to call it. I can also add filters to this. We'll come back to filters later on during the cleaning phase, but with filters in Tableau Prep, it brings up a calculated field. Again, we've seen this in desktop, but with filters, they can only come out to Boolean statements. So we'll come back to that on creating these true or false calculations. Now, finally, on the right, on this last column, this sample values, there is just a few values just to give you an idea of what's in that column in case you wanted to make any modifications, such as the data type. Now, for those of you that have used Tableau Desktop, there is whenever we're dealing with measures, the default aggregation that we can apply to measures is a sum. So I could take the total of this male and female columns, and I won't really need this single without children's total. Now, it may be useful to have that field in there, but if this was a data set that had, let's say, 100 fields or 1,000 fields, it would eventually hinder on the performance of Prep and then down the road desktop. So our goal here is to try to shrink the table that we're working with, make it thinner if possible, so that way as we go through the workflow, there's less calculations for Prep to do. So I'm going to get rid of all of the total fields. So that's going to be the single without children's here by simply unchecking that field. And each of the totals is going to be every third option. So I'm just going to deselect these. We could leave the total male and total female in there if you wanted to. Again, it depends on what you need available to you in Tableau Desktop or what the story is you're trying to build through Tableau. But in our case, we can simply deselect those and only work with a smaller table, and then that will help with our performance in prep and run the workflow much quicker. I want to show you what connecting to a CSV file looks like, because we get slightly different options with that than within Excel. So I'm going to create a new flow. I'm not going to save this one because we won't be needing this one anymore. And I'm going to connect to a text file. And I'm going to connect to this July 2016 flights data. So same interface, but we have a slightly different option here, and that's this text settings. With CSV files, we can identify a separator. So right now, a separator for each of our fields. So right now it's recognizing a comma. But if I change that field separator, it now no longer can find those other field names. So we do have that option with CSV files, as well as changing the text qualifier, character set, and the locale. There could be different options depending on what data source you're connected to, and Tableau Prep will just give you those options here in the input step. Now, in the metadata profile for this flight data, I'm not going to make any changes to this, but I do want to do some exploration and some cleaning with this. So I'm going to go back to the workflow pane, the flow pane up at the top, and I'm going to click on this little plus icon, and I'm going to add a step. Adding a step basically adds a clean step, which updates now to display our fields, our data here. Now in the middle, this section that I'm going to highlight in red is called our profile pane. It basically lists out all our fields as well as the actual data within that field. Above that, we have our little toolbar. We can filter values. We can create calculated fields. And below our profile pane is our data grid, which gives you a row by row view of your data. And a cool thing about the profile pane and the data grid is that as we select values within our profile pane, it updates the data grid below to show you what values pertain to maybe, let's say, a specific airline that I select. So if I go over to this airline description, I travel a lot to do trainings on Tableau desktop as well as Tableau Prep. And I fly American Airlines because it's the easiest out of DC, but I'm starting to find out it's actually the hardest to redeem rewards. So just a tip for anyone looking to find a loyalty program. But if I click on American Airlines here in airline description, you can see how in our profile pane, it shows what proportion of that value does American Airlines make, as well as in our data grid, it displays all of the rows that pertain to American Airlines. If anyone is not on mute, I'm just going to ask if you could just politely be on mute until the end of this demo. Now, if I scroll over, I can see, well, what percentage does American Airlines make up of this data of, let's say, the flights that occurred on July 8th, 2016. I see that 16% are highlighted. If I go over to this tail number field, I see that there's a null field, a null value, and that currently American Airlines makes up 71% of those null values. So I'm going to keep this in mind because right now, all we're simply doing is we're just getting to know our data. We're exploring it. I like to call this phase the dating part. We're getting to know what we like about our data, what we don't like about it, basically what we need to change. And until we've figured out and get a sense of what needs to be changed, then we can start making those appropriate steps. Now, I started looking at American Airlines and I saw these nulls here. And this field pertains to tail number, but there's also some values here like this string of A's. Doesn't look like an appropriate tail number, so I might want to do some digging into what is this field doing and do I need this? And below that, you'll notice that these two tail numbers here, N001 AAA is the same as the one below it, except they're just different cases. So they're actually the same value, but Tableau Prep is treating it differently because one is lower and then one is upper. So we're going to have to group those together. by modifying it. So we're going to keep that in mind as we continue to explore our data. Now you'll notice that as we're clicking through some of these options, I'm going to actually hit escape and deselect American Airlines. There are these little bars to the right of each field. These bars just give you a sense of the distribution of that data. For example, if I look at origin city, there is this big bar here on the right. Let's see what value that is. I can click on that bar and I can see that these are the flights coming out of Chicago. We can also use those bars to navigate through the field. So I can click on an area, or I can click and drag to see what fields are either just where is there a lot of frequency in them. Even there's also a way where I can sort by ascending. I can also sort by descending, or the default is going to be by our data source order. So again, you can use that to see maybe perhaps what services or products that you're offering aren't doing so well. If each row is a transactional piece, then those distributions can kind of give you a quick sense of what is the biggest values in our data set and which are smallest. If I look again at this airline description, I'm just going to expand this slightly so that we can see the full name here. There is this little ID attached to it. This WNOOB6. I might want to separate these so I can use them individually. So I'm going to show us later how to split this field, just like what we do in Tableau Desktop. And I'm just going to sort this just to see which is our most common. So it's like Southwest Airlines is our highest, our most frequent airline in our data set. I'm going to sort this into descending. And when I sort to descending, I noticed that there's actually 3 Southwest Airlines here and 1 at the bottom. So we're having this issue again where it's both case sensitivity as well as an extra character is giving us multiple values for just Southwest Airlines. So I'm going to need to clean this up a little bit so that all of these 4 separate instances of Southwest Airlines is just read as one single Southwest value. So with that, I'm now going to actually clean this data set up and after we've sort of gone through that exploration phase, I'm going to go back to that nulls values that we saw in the tail numbers. Usually when I'm cleaning data up, I like to start with the nulls. It just gives me a place to start with. And then from there, I can start looking to see maybe what are some other changes I need to make and start writing down, basically a checklist or a punch list of items I need to update. Now, depending on how you collect data, you could choose to replace nulls with, say, a no data entered. Because if, let's say, you're collecting data on a free form field, maybe it's a survey, and the user didn't choose to enter in some sort of data, it might populate up as null. So you don't want to exactly exclude the data, which you can by right-clicking and then selecting exclude. But instead, just replace the value for null by double-clicking on it, and you can type in data not entered. So you can still use that data and even get a sense of, okay, where are the gaps in my data set and where do I have to go back and figure out where is data missing and how can I troubleshoot some of that. Now, below that, we have those 2 tail numbers, N001 with a lowercase a and then with an uppercase A. I'm going to combine these 2. I'm going to go to the top right-hand corner here. There's a little arrow to the top right-hand of that field in that profile pane. I'm going to click on that dropdown, and I'm going to clean this by making it uppercase. You have other options to make everything lowercase. You can remove some letters or numbers, so basically trimming pieces out or trim spaces. But I'm going to make everything uppercase so that it converts those lowercase a's to uppercase. And that's combined both of them into this single set. So I'm going to actually Control Z just to show you what was the count for that. The lowercase had 18, the uppercase had 1 row, and after we used that cleaning step to group them together, we now have 19 in that single field. Now I'm going to go scroll over to the airline description. One other tip that you can do is, let's say you're dealing with tail number a lot and you want to see tail number and airline description right next to each other. You can click on tail number, hold it, and you can actually drag the field over to the left. And you'll notice that as I am dragging over a field, I can actually merge the fields together. And I'm going to drop this right after airline description. So this has reordered the table in our data grid below so that when you export this out into a CSV or an extract, it's basically going to be in this field order. Let's see. So, and you can drop fields on top of each other to merge. You would only merge if like you were unioning tables together, and let's say airline description and tail number were both the same data, but just named differently. You can then merge them so that we just are collapsing both of those columns into just one single column, which reduces the number of fields that Tableau Prep has to work with, and then ultimately helps with our performance. So looking at airline description, I'm going to separate our airline name from this this airline ID. Several ways that we can split. I can click the drop down, again, where we had done the cleaning step. I can go to split values, and I can do an automatic split and a custom split. Again, similar features that we've seen in desktop versus prep. And I bet you're wondering, you know, Nelson, if I can do all of this in desktop, if there's some steps I can do in desktop, why would I want to do this in prep? Again, whatever steps that we can take out of desktop and do it outside is going to help us with running with our performance. So when it goes to your end user, which may be your manager, your C-suite, or other analysts, when they interact with your dashboard, the load time is going to be significantly less. So whatever we can do outside of desktop, in this case prep, will be much better in the end. So I can do a custom split. I can do a split from this dropdown, or I can just have the field selected, and up in this toolbar, I have that same option available to us. So I'm going to do a custom split here, which will identify where I have to identify a separator that I want this field to split on or create additional columns on. And I see in airline description that the ID and the airline name is separated by a colon. So I'm going to enter a colon, and I want to split off 2 columns from this, or 2 fields, because I want one that's going to just give me the airline name and then another that's going to just give me the ID. If I only split off 1 field, I'll get if I did 1 from the last, I'll get the airline ID, but I won't get the airline description or the airline name by itself. So I'm going to split this off into 2. And on the left-hand side, I'm going to expand this outward so you can see it's given our fields airline description split 1 and airline description split 2. So I'm going to rename airline description here to be airline, and then airline description split 2 is going to be our airline ID. Now, while I have separated these 2 out, I still have that original field airline description. I'm going to choose to get rid of this because it's just an extra field, and I don't want to slow down Tableau Prep. So I'm just going to click this drop down, or you can right click in the white space above that and remove this field, because I can simply just work with the 2 new fields that I've created. But I haven't forgotten about that Southwest Airlines. I know that there is still 4 values in there, this original Southwest Airlines Co., and then those 3 other values. So I can do a group and replace function on this. So if I click that drop down, we have several options available to us. We could manually select the fields that we want to group together, which brings up a list of all of the unique values that I have. So let's say I want to group everything in Southwest Airlines, I can go through the scroll down option and select the 3 Southwest Airlines to group up to that one single value. But that's a little bit tedious. And if I had to group more than just one airline, or maybe you had several clients or thousands of clients in this one field, and maybe there was just a manual error where now you had to group, like, let's say 100 clients. Doing this manual selection would take a long time. So Tableau Prep has given us some algorithms that will automatically recognize some fields either by pronunciation or by common characters, a little bit like fuzzy clustering. So I'm not going to do the manual selection here. I'm going to go back to that drop-down menu, go to Group and Replace, and I'm going to do it by pronunciation. Just giving this some time to load. Whenever Tableau Tableau Prep groups things for you, it gives us that little paperclip icon. It's the same paperclip icon that we see in desktop whenever we're creating our own groups. So if I click on Southwest Airlines, I can see that those four values for Southwest Airlines are now aggregated up to southwestairlines.co. Now, there are times when the pronunciation and common characters doesn't exactly work. It doesn't work 100% of the time. So maybe Southwest Airlines Co. is not supposed to be part of this group. I could deselect it and it will take it out of that group. But I actually want it in here though. So I'm going to put that back in. Or maybe there was another value here or another member that the pronunciation didn't catch. By simply clicking on this check, I can include Spirit Airlines to be part of that group. Whenever you use these group and replace functions, I would suggest that you first identify all of the groups that have this paperclip icon and double check that the values that are included in there are indeed supposed to be in there. Because I've definitely come into some encounters where it was just like one value off, but you just want to do your due diligence and make sure that it's indeed grouping correctly. Now, all of the changes that we're making so far are being logged. And on this left-hand side of our profile pane and our data grid is a changes pane. So if I click on this arrow, you'll see that we've made 8 changes so far. And it's basically kept a log of every single change that I've made. And I can even go back into this and delete a certain step. For example, this group and replace. I can click on it and it will show me specifically what field was changed as a result of that action. Maybe my manager comes back to me and says, actually, the data that is null pertains to maybe refunds on flights. And it's actually data that's not been entered. So we just want to exclude our nulls. I'm going to go to this changes pane. I'm going to get rid of that instance of that action that I've created. And the null returns to my tail number. I can right click on this null now, exclude that value, which will get rid of all the rows that have this null item in there, like so. There's also this 6 A's tail numbers. If I click on that, it looks like the destination city, which is Anchorage, Alaska, and the origin city, also Anchorage, Alaska, as well as a distance flight of 0. It also seems that these flight numbers are negative, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for my data here. So I don't think I'm going to include this in my data set. I'm going to right click and also exclude those tail numbers as well. Now, as I continue to clean, maybe I get another request or another question. My manager says, okay, we need to actually focus on, let's say, you want to look at flights that started and ended in the same city. So ultimately, I'm looking for flights where the origin city is equal to the destination city. So I'm going to create a calculated field with that to help filter my data and make it much easier for me to display this in desktop and see which cities are in state. Brings up the calculated field editor. looks a lot like what we see in Tableau Desktop. We see the little tool on the right-hand side that can show us how to use certain functions. And we're going to call this calculated field, let's say this is InState flights. And again, with calculated fields in Tableau Prep, it can only return a Boolean. So that's just a true or false statement, binary result. And with string functions, the string, you're basically going to ask Prep to return values that either equal some value or a multitude of values using the OR statement. So if I'm looking for in-state flights, then I want the destination state to be the same or equal to the origin state. And we see that our calculation is valid. Now, if we're doing a filter for integers or numbers, I would use less than, greater than, or equal to give us that Boolean statement. And I'll do that with distance, our distance field in just a bit. So I'm going to save this in-state flights field. And that creates a new column, just like a calculated field would in desktop, of flights that are within state as well as out of state. So clicking again on those values can give me an idea of which airlines are providing a lot of in-state. Looks like Southwest Airlines is doing that. And looks like there's a lot in California as well. Approximately 30% of the flights are in-state. And if I click on California, it's going to be those Los Angeles to San Francisco flights. Now, other ways that we can filter in Tableau, if I go over to our distance here, I could create a calculated field to filter my distances, or I can do a range of values. So I'll do the same result of, let's say that we want to see flights that were less than 500 miles. I can create a calculation, show me where the distance was less than 500. So now it's filtered out to only display areas or flights that were less than 500. I'm going to go back to my changes pane. I'm going to delete that step there. And I'm going to do the same thing using a different option. So get rid of that. I'm going to click the drop down, go to filters, and I'm going to do it by a range of values. And similar setup to working with filters in desktop, I can say, show me flights that were less than 500. So I'm going to put the range up to 499. I can also do it by a minimum, or basically just say at least or at most. So I'm going to leave this as a range to 499 miles, which will filter that out now. Now, you'll notice that this bin here, or this distance field, shows us bins or a histogram of our data. Tableau Prep in the profile pane will give you the option to display this as a histogram or these bins, or you can see a more detailed view, which will give you each unique value within that field. So I can see all of the individual fields and what was that most common distance that was flown. And you'll notice that by looking at those mini bars to the right, there is this one bar that's sticking all the way out. And if I click on that, I can see it's just 337 miles. And that 337 miles is, again, for that California flight from SF to LA, being serviced by, looks like American Airlines, and some by United, perhaps. Now, I can go back and toggle, and let's return to that summary view or the histogram view of distance. Now, the number of bins is dictated by what is the min and the max of your distances. So it will look at your min and max and then create a range, or create bins that Tableau will find, the most appropriate or the easiest to work with. Other other types of filtering is going to be for dates. If I click this drop down again, go to filters, I can filter by a range of dates, which is very much similar to the range of values that we saw in distance. So let's say that I was starting a marketing campaign and I wanted to see how were my sales after that marketing campaign, which may have been the 3rd. I can reduce down and filter that data just by that range of values. Again, we can do the same thing using minimum and maximum as well. The other option for filtering with dates is we can do relative dates. So with a relative date, we can look at from the current date, show me the past 3 years worth of data, or we can anchor it to some specific date, such as when this employee was hired, or when we brought on a new partner to our firm. Did our overall bottom line increase? How much sales how much new business had they brought in since they were entered into our company, and things like that. So if you're familiar with filters in Tableau Desktop, you'll find that filtering in Prep is quite similar. Just got to get used to some of the Booleans and to have a little bit more of that versatility with filtering in Prep. Now, let's say that the prep I've done on this data set is about where I want it to be. We could keep going through this, and I'm ready to output this into a hyper file. I'm going to go ahead and click on this plus sign, and I'm going to add an output. Again, doing this from our flow pane, which is the top section of our prep here. So I'm going to add an output, and I can choose to save this as a flat file, or I can publish this as a data source to my server. I won't be able to publish this to server now, but if you did, let's say you had Tableau server, you could sign into your server and then publish it from there. I'm going to save it as a flat file, and I'm going to just save this to my Tableau repository, my Tableau Prep repository in the data sources folder, and let's call this the flight data. Now I can choose to do it as a hyper for those that are on Tableau 10.5 or higher, so including 2018.1. You'll be able to use this .hyper to read it in desktop. But if you're using a Tableau desktop version that is lower than 10.5, I would suggest using a TDE file. And then finally, we have the option to export as a CSV. Now, whenever we create an output step in Prep, you have to make sure that even though we've selected the location of where we want to save it, it hasn't actually executed the workflow. 2 places you can do that. You can click on this play button to run the workflow, or you can do it from the bottom where it says run flow, and either step would work. So if I select run flow, it's going to run the workflow, create the query, run the calculations, and then save a copy of that table in the form of a .hyper file at the designated location. Now, this step will vary, obviously, depending on how large your data set is. If you're finding that this workflow is taking really long to execute, then we need to take a look at the steps that we've taken here and see, is there additional fields that I can take away from this workflow so that I can reduce the number of calculations that Prep has to run? Or again, just trying to think of ways that we can change around how our workflow is created. Because there's not one right way to do it, but we always got to keep in mind performance as a key factor. Now, currently, Tableau Prep cannot automate these workflows based on a schedule. So say you needed this workflow to be executed at the beginning of every day to supply to your BI team to do their analytics and update their dashboards. Currently, we'll have to go into Tableau Prep, open the workflow, and then run the workflow in order to update the data set. So hopefully down the road, I know down the road they are looking into automating this process, but for now, it's going to have to be a manual clicking of that play button in order to run that workflow. And that's pretty much it. All I have for the demo. I know it was kind of a crash course on how to clean some of the different cleaning functions. There's a ton of other functionality in Prep where we can pivot fields, create joins, unions. And if you guys do have questions on that, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But I'll kind of open it now to the floor if you have questions on anything I presented or things related to Tableau Prep.
Thanks again, Nelson. Just to kind of keep a kind of priority and list of things, could we have people place things and their questions in the chat option? We have one already. And Nelson, you can take a swing at this. I can also help out if you need. But I've got a question here that says, how is Alteryx different from Tableau Prep?
So, I mean, they're both ETL tools. I would say that Alteryx right now just has a lot more functionality than Tableau Prep, given how much longer given how much longer Alteryx has been out. So Tableau Prep is not at the same level of functionality as Alteryx, but Tableau is investing a lot of the resources into Prep. So there will be a time when Prep is going to be catching up to Alteryx. I just don't know how long that timeline would be.
I would also add that Alteryx has significant capabilities in terms of plugging into existing coding libraries. So it can connect to your R suites, to your different Python tools, to your data science libraries that are out there. Alteryx is really doing a concentrated push in those efforts to make sure that people can use that type of work and use that type of advanced coding functionality in a drag and drop type environment. So Alteryx really kind of has that as a differentiator as well, that's aside from just the ETL process. Okay, got another question from Paul, and he says, if there's time, love to see how to use Prep to bring the Navy file into a tidy format. Paul, can we hold on that just for a couple minutes just to see if there's any other questions? But if there aren't, then Nelson, I can just toss that back over to you and you can kind of run through that. I do want to be respectful of people's time, so we will be cutting it off at 2 o'clock.
Sure. I'm not sure if I'm going to have time to demo how to tidy that up. I guess I want to try to put it into the perspective of maybe what Paul is using that data for, because I could change into different formats. It really just depends on the question that I'm trying to answer with the Navy data. So if maybe there is a different way to pose that question, then I'd be that would help narrow down the answer for that. What percentage of your customers do you think are likely to be satisfied with their needs with just Tableau Prep? That's a hard question to answer. I think it really just depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, there are limitations with Prep in terms of functionality, and as Ben alluded to, Alteryx has a lot more capabilities. I found that I've been able to use Prep to get me most of the way there with some of the engagements. But if you need to do, if there's something that you need to execute that is not given in Prep, then we might need to look at solutions outside of it.
Yeah, just to add to that, I'm not sure we have a raw percentage yet, just because, like Nelson's mentioned a couple times, their Prep is a new tool. And so it's at the point where we're starting to use it and starting to deploy it, but because you're kind of getting a first glance at this point of here's some of the capabilities and there's a lot more coming down the pipeline. When we talk to our contacts over at Tableau office and stuff, there's massive development being put into this. That scheduling that Nelson was talking about is coming down the road shortly. I mean, they recognize that there is a need for all of these things. So as the two of them catch up in the future, I do think that we'll be able to swing more people towards Tableau Prep just in terms of the types of functionality that we run into. And it may end up that there is a space carved out for Prep and there's a space carved out for Alteryx in those workflows.
Yeah, and then I think with Prep, it's really good for individuals who haven't used an ETL tool before or are not familiar with that process, because if it's just a new realm for you, I think those customers will find it really helpful. But for more really experienced data scientists, they might find that Tableau Prep doesn't exactly fill all of their needs. So I would say, like, if you're not really experienced in the ETL process, Tableau Prep would be really helpful to just sort of get an understanding of how things work and like that. And then Paul Albert's question. Yes, Prep is currently no cost to desktop clients if you have a Tableau desktop license, but they do plan to start charging for that around mid-2020. I think right now I'm not sure on the exact date, but somewhere it's in mid-2020.
And just to note for those, you can always feel free to post your comments in the DC Meetup group and post any questions there. You can message me directly. You can post under this event. There's a lot that we can still cover with Tableau Prep in terms of pivots, in terms of joins, in terms of a bunch of the other capabilities that Nelson was able to talk about, but we really needed to get this kind of foundational piece in first. And coming up in future events, we'll dive deeper into those different topics. So we'll be able to kind of introduce all the various features that are out there. Got another question from Laureline. Does Prep do joins the same as desktop? As a test, I joined several Excel tabs in desktop, and then in Prep and got a different number of rows off by 2.
I would need to see the setup in so to answer the first part, Prep does do joins similar to desktop. It gives you a little bit more functionality and ability to change certain values that don't exactly join up correctly. But I would need to, in order to answer the second part of your question, I would actually need to see the setup of how you did in Prep to get you the right answer for that.
Okay. Any other questions? Cool. Well, then I think we're going to call it for today, just to be respectful of everyone's time, ending at 2. Again, if you have any additional questions or want further clarification, or you want to get in touch with either me or with Nelson for some more specific questions, you're welcome to reach out to me over the Meetup group. And we hope to be able to go through and see more of you at future events like this and be able to walk through different capabilities. So thanks so much, Nelson. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you all at the next event.